The Dickheads are presented in color.
Hey, Dickheads, like a pink laser beam of truth beaming from New Jersey, Ohio, and San Diego to your brain hole. I am your personal dickhead. Well, we have two personal dickheads. Myself and Professor David Harlan Wilson are in the house with one of our favorite authors on this here planet. Maybe other planets, he's not one of our favorite authors, but on Earth, Barry Malzberg is one of our favorites. Barry is returning to the Dickheads podcast. We had him on when he was the ripe young age of 79. And we're very excited to have you back, Barry. I have a very insightful question to ask you first. How you doing?
You warned me that this was coming, and
Yeah.
I'll give you a hard acquired answer. I have learned in the last half decade in that time that the trajectory of a writer's career and the writer's life they are twin trajectories in absolute opposition to one another, in no way affiliated. I am in my doting senescence realizing that in a very small way I am becoming well known, at least on the net. I am seeing more feedback, more commentary than I ever dreamed 50 years ago I would get. On the other hand, as a practical money-raising opportunity or avenue, the signs are up. Cops put up the signs. The detour necessary, road no longer operative, whatever. Construction, bad construction at pause. It is remarkable that the better known I become, the less my ability it would seem to convert a dime out of it. Now,
Well,
this is not the way you participate, I understand, in interviews, particularly in the beginning of interviews. You don't start with this kind of whining. However, what the heck, you know?
hey, this
It's
is
been
your
an
forum.
education. What?
This is your forum now. You
It's
can
yeah,
say
it's,
what.
and it'll be all over the net. Well, not all over the net, but it will
Hey, we're
be
gonna do what we can.
available to people who have no use for me, who will go around quoting it. But the heck with it.
Yes, well, we'll endeavor to do that. And if you want to send money Barry's way through support, your publisher.
I have never attempted to raise a dime. I have never asked for Nebula nominations. I have never in any tried to sell my books. I just don't.
Well, we are going to try through
You
Professor
can try.
Wilson's
You can try all
AOP.
you want.
You have 4 books that have brand new editions, and they're going to have new covers soon. So by the time this comes out, I'm sure the new covers will be uploaded, and we want to send people the way of those books. And also, this is going to be a part of a 2-part episode. And so we want to let people know right up at the beginning that you have some reading to do for the other part of this, which is we're going to read The World of Null A by A.E. von Vogt, Philip K. Dick's Solar Lottery, and Barry's The Gamesman, and cover them as a trilogy of books that interact with each other and are in conversation with each other. So,
Science fiction has always been in conversation with itself, as has been noted. I mean, Budrus noted this decades ago.
yes,
We all confer openly or not so openly, and that's
right.
good. That's a very good thing. I mean, in this,
Absolutely.
it is the most collaborative of all fiction, of all genres.
I got
Absolutely.
I got a question about that. And first of all, you're so right, Barry, in terms of it's so difficult in the 21st century, and it becomes more and more difficult. I don't care what art form you're involved in to make money with art of any kind,
Oh, sure,
increasingly.
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm nostalgic for an era in which I didn't exist. But the other thing was, well, now it's escaped me. Go ahead, Dave, and it'll come back.
Okay. Well, since the last time we talked, it's funny because you kept referring to Breakfast in the Ruins and telling people to read it in the last interview. So at least one person did, and that was me. And I keep Breakfast of the Ruins right here on my desk. So it's right in front of my eyes on my sci-fi non-fiction reference shelf. And so with Breakfast in the Ruins,
Now that's an expansion, you know.
yes,
That's of
It has the complete Engines of the Night
Engines of the Night,
as
right?
the first half, and the second are the post essays of that.
yes, yeah, the essays that came later,
Yeah.
and
Seminal book.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and so we might repeat ourselves from the last interview a little bit, but we're
Go
reflecting
into
back.
it. Go.
Yeah, we're reflecting back on these things, and I really want to highlight that book as one that is a series of essays and commentary about science fiction. My copy is extremely well highlighted, dog-eared, and noted. I have written in the copy, and it's really great stuff.
Thank you.
And
Now,
I'm
I'm
gonna,
going to say quickly
yes.
that the afterwards to the Lone Wolf series, which has been reissued by Starkhouse, all 14 novels. I have done 7. They're done as Starkhouse doubles, put that in quote. And I have done afterwards to each of the 7 volumes.
Mm.
And they're out. It's the best writing I've ever done.
Oh,
I have said, and I've said it for a while now. And it's still true. I am just beginning how to learn how to learn to write the personal essay. It has been a journey of discovery, and I am still learning. And the quality of whatever you think of the opinions expressed, the quality of the prose is absolutely the best I've ever achieved.
oh
Say,
wow.
what were those books again, Bear?
It's The Lone Wolf, reissued by Starkhouse in California. 14 novels of the Executioner spawned a whole bunch of imitators, and the Berkeley Books editor George Ernsberger wanted to get on the wagon. And he called me. He said, "You're the only guy I know." I had sold him 3 science fiction novels. He said, "You're the only guy I know who I think can do 10 novels in 10 months." And that's exactly what we need. And as I wrote an introduction to the series. What really caught my attention is it was $2,750 a book. That was the advance for a novel. But what really caught my attention is that 25% would be payable upon signature of the contract. And this, this brought the old hack to a kind of trembling awareness, and I did it. And the
And what
books,
year was that?
they were published by Berkeley in 74 and 75. They were,
Nice.
and Starkhouse released them last year, all of them
Awesome.
in
How,
seven
how did
volumes.
how did you obviously, you're very capable. Coffee and cigs? Like, how do you do that? How do you produce a novel a month for consecutive, how many? 12 months?
I did the first 10 novels in 7 months. The
Jeez.
2 months off because the publisher of Berkeley got hold of the first manuscript or the first 3 and thought they're too tough. I mean, they're really distancing, and you're killing off real people here. These aren't cartoons, the death scenes. These are real people having real pain as they really die. And besides, the name of the protagonist, Wolf Conlon, is dangerously similar to my own name, and which I had no idea, not even in the Freudian sense. In any event, there was a 2-month hold while he and Berkeley or whatever dithered as to whether they wanted to go ahead. And George Ernsberger, the sainted George Ernsberger, fought for me and called me in mid-March and said, "Go ahead, just do it." They never bothered me again, and I did the next 7 in 6 months. So
Just like, was
they
it
were,
So
this is total fanboy stuff, but did you have a set work schedule? You just get up, you do an
no,
8 hour,
I did it.
yeah, you just get it done.
The best sex schedules are, gee, let's do it.
Yeah.
not let's do it at 3:30 p.m. and we'll do 69 first, but then we'll hold it off until tomorrow. You know, and here's a chart of where I want you to put this and that. No, it was for me. It just you said you did it. It happened. It happened as it happened.
Yeah.
And my one regret about that, well, my regret, of course, is that I didn't make Don Pendleton money. I made very little money. But my single regret, most severe regret, is I did not know, and this is self-pitying and sad, I didn't know how good they were until 40 years later. I thought I was writing junk revenge porn. It is called.
Well, yeah, and
The
those
trade, and I was doing except I wasn't. Except that this guy had a real interior, and I was dealing with very serious with the whole issue of vigilantism and cultural breakdown through this one insane mass murderer disguised as a bitter cop.
Well, that's interesting, Barry, too, because you've written all these science fiction novels that we consider to be masterpieces, and you're saying this men's adventure novel that you wrote under,
I did,
for a
yeah,
series.
I know
is
the
your
science
favorite.
fiction novels were good. They weren't good in any way that was going to put much in my pocket. But I knew Beyond Apollo was decent, and I knew Scott is my own personal favorite. It's about hardly the world's favorite. I knew it was good,
Yeah.
but I had contempt. I had contempt for what I was writing, and I remember one party with neighbors around the corner. Hey, you're a writer. What are you up to? What are you writing? And I more or less convulsed them by talking in the most contemptuous way about the Lone Wolf series then in process. Well,
Well, and so I think what Professor Wilson was trying to get at, and because, as Dickens, we're very aware that when he wrote 5 novels between 63 and 64, that he was doing speed, and he was like up all night doing these things. So our question, I'm sure, is
never.
Barry, you were extremely prolific with stuff in your name, K.M. O'Donnell, Mel
Yes.
Johnson.
I never wrote drunk with one paragraph.
Well, see, that's the thing.
Of a novella, which was expanded to a novel, and here I am scrambling. I'm dropping names and dates like bed bugs, so forgive me. But there was one paragraph in a novel which I wrote pretty well drunk. Otherwise, I knew all the stories, and Lord knows I had observed them. I knew writers. And I just did not drink. I did not drink when I wrote. And since 81, March of 81, I don't drink, period.
So were you drinking a lot of coffee, or just loved writing?
I was smoking and smoking. Haven't had a cigarette in 40 years. But I was smoking, and I certainly was eating and all the rest of it. But But you're looking at a bottle of booze. This is what AA teaches you. And I went to a couple of meetings long past quitting because I wanted to observe. And what AA teaches you, if you're serious, is if you're looking at a bottle of rye, you're looking at your death. Just see that, understand that.
Absolutely.
Understand that and see it through that lens, and then make your decision and make it again and go through that every day.
Yeah, well, we're both sober guys here, so
and I went through kind of my own sort of personal hell, but I've been sober more or less since about 8 years.
Yeah.
So I want to read you this quote from Breakfast in the Ruins, and I want to talk about it. Whatever happens to science fiction, it would not exist if it had not been given a name and a medium for this. If we are not led to praise Gernsback, we must entomb him with honor. He was a crook, old Hugo, but he made all of us crooks possible.
Absolutely. In the modern sense, with quotes, science fiction as a category, as a genre, as a magazine, as a fan duel, as a letters to the editor, as a convention, a series of conventions, all of it existed because Gernsback started amazing, ran a letter column because and filled the magazine with that. He could have seen, didn't have to pay a dime, and got the various correspondence to talk with one another. First in with the pen and the typewriter, and then at conventions and everywhere else. He allowed the culture itself to exist.
And is that where because of course nowadays there's social networks and all of this where people interact. Somebody like that, it would have to be at conventions, right? Where you actually marshal talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the first World Convention in New York in 1939, already drew a crowd, was well publicized, and was getting people who knew one another well, but now could meet. And it
Yeah.
really it institutionalized, or as Donald Trump might say, it monetized an obsession
Well, and Barry,
and structured it.
I want to give you some credit because in 2017, when Jeanette and it's NG, I don't know, I don't want to mispronounce her name, but when she won
I remember that. I have written of that. I know what you're talking about.
yeah, when she won
Can't pronounce it, but I can talk around it.
Yeah, when she won the John Campbell Award, she got famous for saying John W. Campbell is a fucking fascist. And there was a lot of notoriety for her because people were saying, like, she is the first to confront this.
Hey,
and I called bullshit because you did it to his face. You called him out on this stuff and these issues to his face and had a conversation with him about it.
Oh, we had a 2-hour meeting.
Yeah.
Campbell and I've written of that. The essay has been published here and there.
It's in Breakfast in the Ruins, but I wonder if you could talk about that conversation. I know we talked a little bit about it in the first interview, but just
it's an analog. I even sold it to Analog as a short essay in 1980. It's in Breakfast in the Ruins. When I accepted the Campbell Award, the first Campbell Award, I delivered that from the podium. It's been around, but I first must correct you. You got it wrong. Everybody's got it wrong. Elves cleaned that up. The first line of her speech of acceptance was as follows. Joseph Campbell, the editor of Amazing Stories, was a racist and a bigot.
Okay.
That, as I said, the elves came in even before it hit the net and they cleaned it. But she had a throwaway line in one of her speeches that she appreciated that it had been edited because she wasn't all that familiar with. She wasn't familiar enough, but she destroyed the Campbell Award in the novel and for Best New Writer with about 30 seconds of shallow breaths. It's unforgivable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever you can call John, that Silverberg knew him well and was just shattered by that speech. He was in the audience. Mm-hmm. But you can call Campbell any number of things, but he was no fascist.
Okay. And
racist, I'll discuss that with you. There's plenty of evidence there. He endorsed Wallace in October in his November issue in 1968. He wrote his editorial endorsing Wallace and urging us to vote for him. So that's an open question.
What I think is great, though, and what I think is underrated or undervalued is that you did confront Campbell on a lot of these issues.
And I confronted him on everything and went out of there shuddering after 2 hours. And the punchline of my essay, which is that I went out of there shuddering. Whether he wanted to go to lunch or whatever, I have no idea. I'd had enough. I stood shaking by the elevator, which took its time coming. And as I stood there shaking, Campbell passed me and observed my demeanor and gave me a verbal slap on the back and said, "Don't worry about it, son. I just like to shake him up."
That's awesome.
And I'll give him that. I really will.
Yeah, and I think I come from different school of I think Campbell's role was important. Just for Twilight alone, right? And for Who Goes There. And his role as an editor is really important. And it's not to say that we should not confront the things that were negative about him, but I also think we have to and Alec Neville Lee's book Astounding does a really good job of balancing like the pros and the cons of the guy.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah. And
and NG beat it
yeah.
for best. Her speech
Yeah.
beat that book for best related nonfiction the next year.
Yep.
Which is an obscenity beyond language to express.
Okay. So you wrote in Breakfast in the Ruins, modern science fiction generally began in 1937 with the ascent of Campbell, was literature centered around a compact group of people. It was no Bloomsbury, but there could have been no more than 50 core figures who did 90% of the writing and editing. All of them knew one another. Most knew one another well, lived together, married one another, collaborated, bought each other's material, and so on. For a field which was conceptually based on expansion, the smashing of barriers, the far-reaching, and so on, science fiction was amazingly insular. So being a part of that community, did you feel like you had to work to get into an already insular community when you started writing, or did you
Not
feel
too hard. Not
Yeah.
too hard. Harry Harrison, for reasons I could never understand, liked me, and more or less proctored me and took me around, and taught me a lot, and was a great friend, and I worked at Scott Meredith, which certainly gave me access to knowledge of the field and its practitioners, and I began to go to conventions in 1970. I was already quasi established in 1972, and I began to go to conventions and meet more people and so on. It was welcoming. That is what is so tragic about what has happened to science fiction, which I am sure, if you've observed, has become quite an ugly cabal.
So that was my question from earlier that I had forgotten. I'm really out of touch with 21st century science fiction, and I'm
Stay out
kind
of touch. You'll live longer and feel better.
I mean, that I was going to ask. I mean, are you? I couldn't even speak intelligently about who's doing what now. Is that something you pay attention to?
I share that. I share that.
Yeah.
I don't brag about it, but I don't want to know. I certainly don't want to know the gossip, and I find most of the present, what I confront, unreadable.
Yeah.
That's that can be age and envy, they would say, and ageism and so on. A senile old expletive deleted, you know, projecting his bitterness and self regret upon we brave new world. Okay, have it your way. I don't want to deal with it. I'll put my work up, which I can never could really do anything about in terms of promotion. Let it live or die. There's nothing I can do. It's nothing I want to do.
So you might be in a unique position to answer this, Barry, but we are currently, because we've been covering all the PKD novels in publication order. So we're currently doing the realist mainstream novels that were published posthumously but rejected.
I love your typo, posthumously.
I know, isn't that great?
I do that all the time. Yeah, I do that all the time. They like yeah, it's dyslexia. What can I say? So
Posthumous is better than posthumous, though.
posthumous, yeah, posthumous, yeah. So posthumously, yes, but
But if you spell it HUM, or US, it has that meaning also.
yes. So some of these, now a lot of these novels were rejected, and SMLA sent out like 12 times. But we had a situation when we were breaking down how these were rejected, that these red card, we had this whole long discussion about the red cards from SMLA.
Green
cards. Yeah. So were you ever a part of the process of
No.
Okay.
I was in the fee department.
Okay.
And of course my essay on the agency and the fee department is in Breakfast in the Ruins. Right. And that's it. Everything I had to say is said there.
Yeah.
How long were you
I did a little. I represented Cornell Woolrich, and I insisted upon doing that and made a few sales for him and got to know him. And now and then I would find something in the fee mill, which I would take the responsibility of agenting, but essentially no, I had nothing to do with the so-called pro desks.
Well, but we do know that like Fred Paul, Damon Knight, different people came through the agency reading some of those manuscripts because they've talked.
Oh, never. Knight was a fee man, yes, way back.
Okay.
Larry
And-
Block was a fee man way back.
Okay. And so SMLA had so many important people come in and out of that agency besides
Absolutely.
who they were representing. What would you say is the underrated role of SMLA in 20th century science fiction? Because I think SMLA is so huge for something that most science fiction fans don't even know that the Scott Meredith Literary Agency existed. But it's so crucial.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And we all knew it at the time.
Yeah.
And that was the engine of the night or the day, if you will.
Right.
And porn. That's your trifecta. Because some of your favorite science fiction writers were prolific writers for the West Coast pornography publishers, and also the East Coast. Like me, for instance, I did 10 novels for Midwood Books under pseudonyms, of course, but they were reissued in my own name, most of them, by Starkhouse not so long ago.
Oh. Well, right. And so when you guys understood the importance or the role that you guys were playing with, you had J.G. Ballard, Arthur C. Clarke, you had, Phil, everybody was going through there. So you guys kind of understood, you understood your role, right, at the time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
How did SMLA, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
How did they come to, it wasn't a monopoly, right? But how did they come
not
to
at all. But he had his nose everywhere, and he's another frustrated science fiction writer. He played around with he's a failed SF writer. Most of them are. They wanted to be, and had various degrees of failure or success. And Scott was a groupie. But then most of us are. I'm not in any way finding that a limitation.
Right. And last time you told us the story of when Don Wollheim, when you were in the room when Don Wollheim found out that Man in the High Castle was nominated for the Hugo, and I tell that story all the time because people, I think, Phil getting rejected on the notion that that novel was science fiction at all by Don Wollheim and Tony Boucher, who was, his two editorial mentors, was very painful for Phil. And the Hugo win, I think, was very validating. But Wollheim and being at his, working with him at Ace, that also had to be a very educational experience.
Oh, he mentored me, absolutely. And
Yeah.
my two fan novels, Gathering the Whole of the Planets and Dwellers of the Deep, were at his instigation.
Mm-hmm.
He not only commissioned them, but he took the subject matter. Would not and what can I say? I said there was a memorial service, a panel for him 4 or 5 months after his death at the convention, at the Lunacon in whatever it was, 1990, and I was on the panel and gave my brief eulogy, and I summed it, I think, in a sentence: I love this man, but I did not like him. And that's pretty well. But most of us, not most of us, but half of us at least owe everything to him. Just practical.
Is his sort of because when I read about him, he had this sort of notoriously shitty bedside manner. Is that true? Often when working on editing, folks.
Bedside manner. Are you being sarcastic or?
yeah. I guess.
I don't.
I never got a word of praise from him. I'll tell you that. He commissioned and accepted 2 novels, and put one story into one of his best of the years. The only compliment I ever got is well, about 3 or 4 years into my first so-called full-time career. He said, "Well, you seem to be making it." And I said, "You could have done it too, Don. It was your decision." And he said, "No, you have real talent."
Hmm.
That is as close as I ever got to
Do
any
you think
approbation.
you think withholding that was a technique to keep his people hungry?
Among other things.
Yeah.
Among other, he was jealous of everybody. That runs in the family,
Oh,
of course. They're all jealous of one another.
Yeah.
They all resent it. Asimov wrote many columns about Arthur Clarke and, fun and games, and we were great rivals, and he annoyed me this, but, and so on. But it really did annoy him. There were the big three, Heinlein, Clarke, and Asimov, which he saw as being in competition, and the other two were ahead of him. Always he felt were ahead of him, and he resented that.
hmm.
Now
But
this,
you took. Let me get this
yeah.
get this out. I remembered. I forgot what I was going to say a few minutes ago. You talking about Campbell creating science fiction and so on. And I wanted to say yes, Campbell knew what he wanted to do, and Heinlein showed him how to do it.
Hmm.
It's that crucial. If you
Excellent.
if you ever get to an essay about that, that's my statement. Heinlein said, "Yes, John, you're absolutely right. And what you don't want is stuff that should not be there, and what you do want is right. And this is how to do it." And he showed him from the very beginning, absolutely from the start of his career. And
So
it was
I,
so beautifully integrated science fiction into the material. The explanatory flashback or lecture were gone in Heinlein. The
so
door
before,
dilated. Harlan picked that one up. Crucial sentence, absolutely original. It's the opening of a science fiction story, and the protagonist walks into the next room. The door dilated. It's a whole different world, but it's done so unobtrusively, if I may. It is bound into the material. Heinlein taught us that.
Hmm. So I have one more Don Wilhelm question, then we're going to get into your fiction. And this is kind of a touchy subject with Wilhelm. Of course, since the last time we talked, they had I don't know if you saw the
The great
PBS.
revelation.
Yes. And I wonder how much of the
I
gruff,
never knew.
yeah,
I was absolutely expletive deleted shocked.
yeah. So what I'm talking about for those who don't know is that it came out that Wilhelm was a cross-dresser and had this whole other secret life, and his daughter Betsy, who has been on this podcast, um, Betsy Wilhelm was a part of a PBS documentary about this kind of community that existed in New York that Don was a part of, where
Right.
they would cross dress. And I wonder, for those who didn't who found out about this, you said you had no idea, you were shocked. I wonder if that changes your perception of his grumpiness, because he was kind of suppressing this huge part of himself.
It gave me a better understanding
Yeah.
and showed me why he was such a miserable bastard and unable to express any kind of real affection or friendship for so many people he helped, knew well, and helped and created. And his reaction to all the writers who, like Silverberg and Phil Dick, and there were so many others who started at Ace and grabbed the first opportunity of a higher advance and got out of there, embittered him profoundly. He was a jilted lover, and so on. I'll tell you one anecdote which doesn't get around. The one time I felt I was almost close to him. I was reading for him. He mentored me, and I was his first reader for 2.5 years. And I was in the office one day, and we talked about this. And he talked about, well, he said he was walking to work, coming across town, and some really attractive woman said hello to him and seemed very interested. And he said, you know, it really touched me. But then I kept on walking. And I said, Don, you know, maybe she was interested. And he said, nah, she was only a hooker would be interested. And there's no other reason. And I said, you know, you're perfectly capable of being attractive to attractive women. Nah, get out of here. And I saw into that shrinking, damaged soul everything. I even saw what might explain, other than divine intervention, the cross-dressing.
Yeah, well,
Wasn't
he
good
also,
enough for this, so I'll have to be that.
yeah,
I'll
well,
have to mimic the object of my desire. Who the expert of deleted knows? Really?
well, Betsy talked about how that he was the son of a doctor and that his father was paranoid about infection in their space, and so as kids they weren't allowed to touch anything. And I wonder if that had an effect too.
Everything has an effect on everyone. Okay.
Yeah,
Can
true.
you use that as an epigraph, please, for something in your series? This is
Well,
perhaps the
and
basic human truth.
I do have one question or comment about your ability as being a reader because on my other podcast, I interviewed David Gerald about DC Fontana, and we were talking about his classic science fiction novel, The Man Who Folded Himself. And he said, and this novel has become a classic. It was nominated for all kinds of awards. He said that The Man Who Folded Himself was rejected. And his exact words were that Barry Malzberg saved it from the slush pile. And if it was not for Barry Malzberg, that book would never have been published. Do you remember this at all?
Not really. Not really. I know that
Yeah.
David Gerald, who was the second Random House science fiction novel, mine being the first of a new program, always said that that quote came from him, but it had to do about my support of that novel, which had been accepted by Lee Wright and was in process. And I gave an enthusiastic blurb. I don't recall the DC Fontana at all. I think that I
Well,
am.
no, not that she was involved.
No, I understand. I think I'm
Yeah.
being given credit for something I didn't. I don't recall it.
David Gerald claims that you saved that novel. So,
Well, I certainly made them pay attention.
yeah.
It was in process, and
No, your reading of Slush Piles, in my opinion, has I've always considered it to be one of the major inspirations for Galaxies. Is that the case? Was your novel Galaxies inspired by all that Slush Pile reading that you were doing?
there certainly was stories and novels which were inspired by that, but I never thought Galaxy was.
Interesting.
Uh,
Okay.
uh,
So,
the free script there. I wrote a story for Ellery Queen. What the heck was the title now? Uh, which becomes absolutely my epistolary story about the man who writes letters to dignitaries and the like, and he just wants to be noticed. And he gets form replies up and down the line, dear sir, dear MS, always misspelling his name, and he becomes increasingly impatient with what and aware of the brush off, and is less. He's writing the president by now, and getting replies from the secretary. Thank you very much for your opinion. The president will certainly be interested. And his final letter is I've had enough of this. I've had alienation, and dismissal. I'm going to destroy this country. I'm going to kill you, Mr. President. I'm going to kill you. That's all. That maybe that'll change this. And the reply from the secretary is, "We want to thank you very much for your latest correspondence. As you know, the president is on tour now, but we'll be showing this to him when he applied." That agony column, Ellery Queen, 1269. I dare say John Lennon should have read it. That's all. Anyway.
yeah. So back to galaxies, because we really want to drill into this a little bit, because at least two of the people on the Zoom call think that Galaxies is one of the best science fiction novels of the 20th century and love it.
I agree.
Yeah. In Galaxies, it seemed to me like Beyond Apollo was about the madness of going out into the universe. But what Galaxy seemed to be was confronting that kind of insanity of the universe and the very idea of the metatextual science fiction novel itself.
I will
Right.
let me correct you on Beyond Apollo, and Barry, let me know if I'm wrong. In addition to being about the madness of going into outer space, at the same time, we're going into Harry's inner space. It's simultaneous, the madness of his inner space.
Oh,
Would
sure,
you,
sure.
would you agree with that? Yeah,
But they coalesce. I mean, you can't tell the
sure.
difference.
Absolutely.
And that's what gets people very angry. At least half the readership, the whole effing thing is a trick, a scam. This doesn't exist. It's just a vehicle for Malzberg venting upon his own bitterness, et cetera, et cetera. But
Now,
it's not
And
about that. But
that's what really draws me to, obviously work like yours, Ballard's, Dick's too. They're how they represent inner space and the dynamic ways that they do it. Yeah.
yeah, well, Ballard was a great writer and not an unimportant influence. I've never in any way concealed my debt to him and my great admiration.
Yeah, me too.
Most important thing about Ballard for me was he was doing this. Gee, I thought you can get away with this. I'll
right.
be damned. I reread something I had in one of my essays. I said to Gardner, long before Gardner was Gardner, just a 25-year-old struggling guy like myself, with very thin at that time and driven and broke, and at some nebula reception. I said to him, Gardner, we're in the same racket, and you understand now what I'm sure you've come to understand what I can, which is that you can, if you throw in a rocket, you can get away with the damnedest things. Rocket, a sex change, a spaceship. You be. He said, yeah, that's the way to go.
I take for granted how transgressive something like inner space is, or was rather, in your
Yeah.
like in the new wave and stuff like that. Um, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's all I'm kind of interested in. I'm far more interested in inner space than outer space, but it's kind of everywhere nowadays in various ways. Although, in my opinion, not very effectively rendered. But did you find that that was a problem for you repeatedly?
It
Did
was
you
a
have to
big,
smuggle
it was
that
a
sort of
big
thing into your texts?
It was a big problem. Of course it was. But as I've written, and I think I might have put it in print, the Campbell Award made me the Antichrist of science fiction, and
Hmm.
it persists. That this novel by this guy, for the first award in John's name, would be a novel which really upends everything in which he is reputed to have believed. It was a direct insult. It was an attack. And how dare I? And how dare this committee?
Mhm.
It was it's the wrong kind of fame, and it still lingers.
Well,
Uh,
and that's the thing, is Beyond Apollo kind of gave to these people, they saw it as Beyond Apollo giving Campbell the finger even more than Jeanette did.
Absolutely, that's correct. Absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
through the novel instead of like a speech at the podium, it was through the novel. And were you thinking about Campbellian ideas of science fiction when you wrote Beyond Apollo, or is that just how it came out?
Of course, I was thinking about Campbellian. I thought none of this should be taken for granted. We should take a look at this. I'm not saying that we go the other way, but we should at least look at the other way.
Yeah.
We were closing off, in effect, half of the implications of the category itself.
Yeah, and
So we've taken
Beyond Apollo was my first Malzberg. So at the time, it was obviously very revolutionary in my mind. But now, having read Beyond Apollo twice and having read, close to a double digit of your novels, I think Galaxies is a truly supreme work, in the sense that I think it's a masterpiece. And one of the reasons why is the meta quality of which you are talking not just to the reader directly in a meta way, but you're talking to the genre itself in that
That's right.
novel. Yeah.
And I knew it. Unlike Kurt Vonnegut, who did sell Galaxy a couple of stories and was thought of as an SF writer by people mostly who didn't like him. But I really knew this. I knew it down to the bottom of the barrel what science fiction was, and Galaxy showed that familiarity, and is not overwhelmed with awe, and that just it got a lot of people angry. But Beyond Apollo had preceded that, and that was a direct insult. It was perceived as a direct, conscious, mark you, conscious, deliberate insult to Campbell, to
Yeah.
the man in whose name it was being awarded. I never got out from under that.
Now, a light bulb just singed my head with something, and you might end up calling this bullshit, and we'll all have a good laugh about it. But so Galaxies, the title is not about actual physical galaxies. It's about, is the title a reference to the magazine and to the various worlds that science fiction creates, the various?
Of course.
Okay.
But it is
All right.
also,
So
I mean, it is based upon a novelette called A Galaxy Called Rome, which was the title of one of Campbell's posthumously published uh, editorials. In fact, I think it was his last editorial. And the headline on it was A Galaxy Called Rome.
okay.
And I'm writing about Campbell in the first page. So it's a response to a person, a writer who also inspired me. It's all very complex. And there's a lot of difficulty. But one anecdote which doesn't matter. But Harry Harrison told me there were 5 on the committee. He was one of them. His great friend and faculty at Illinois State. What was it? Not Illinois University, but the
University of Chicago at Illinois.
exactly. Leon Stover was a very close friend and on the faculty, and it was done under the auspices of the university on the university's ground, and he was the faculty member. And I think he was he had tenure, but he felt that this was it was dangerous with all the noise that are around that, the use of the use of the name of the university itself in the award and on the plaque stating the award. He felt it was personally menacing, and they corresponded by mail. Then there was no internet, the good old days. And one of his letters everybody copied everybody else to the other 4 members of the committee before an anticipated session. Where, gentlemen, I would just like to remind you all again that we are not here to vote for the dirtiest novel of the year, but for the best. And he did not want that novel, and I came to understand slowly over the years he felt his very tenure was being menaced when the noise began to erupt. That Illinois, his university was being involved in an award which was deeply loathed by a lot of people in his profession. So there you are.
Let me just real quickly, Barry, you said still talking about Galaxies when it came out, and that you had difficult because one of the reasons I love your work is because you break rules, and I don't think I know anybody who was around my age who doesn't like your work because of that. But you said that that kind of ruined things for you and it was hard.
Rules had to be broken. Unfortunately, those who felt that way were in no mean in 1972. They were not in any command
Yeah.
because they
So,
still are, but there are more of them, and they can make trouble of a different kind.
yeah. But I mean, when you say you had trouble getting out from under that, so people were just more apprehensive to take you on as a result, as a,
I
the public?
the immediate flush. I sold a lot of novels I might not have otherwise sold, and the award did well for me for 5 or 6 years. But it was just Lee Wright was the editor who acquired Beyond Apollo. She was a great mystery editor. Random House, for some reason, decided they wanted to do their science fiction program. It was hot. This was the time. Lee Wright, mine was her first purchase. And she said to me, when the book was in process, shortly before publication, she said, she was the most honored and revered mystery editor of her time, or one of two. And she said, dear, when I read Beyond Apollo, when I read the manuscript, I said, well, I didn't know science fiction at all, but I thought, this is pretty interesting. And if this is science fiction? It's interesting. I think we'll take it on. He said, only when they had put it in galleys and they were sending it out to the book clubs and reviews. He said, only then did I begin to realize that this was not the wisest decision I had ever made.
Well, if you don't have any other questions on
No,
galaxies,
go
I'm going
ahead.
to move on to another book. So one of the reasons why we're in touch, Barry, is because I, in my process of working through and reading all of your work and I have 14 of your books on the shelf behind me. I read The Last Transaction because I kept looking at the description of it and I thought, this sounds like it's talking about these times because when I read it, it was the
Look,
very end of the Trump
you were
years.
right, and the review was fair.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I didn't. There's a postscript to this story, but you finished
yeah,
first.
yeah. Well, I just want to set this up is that I didn't write the most favorable review of The Last Transaction. However, what people should know about the book is it's about an aging president losing his mind in office. And I talked about the fact that it was very Trumpy because I read it in 2020 at the end of the
I
election.
wrote it in 1974.
Right. The year I was born, by the way. But it also seemed like it could have been read a particular way when Reagan was in office because he was obviously suffering mental loss in the second.
I wrote a Reagan story shortly after his election, which is buried in an amazing story somewhere. Sure,
Yeah.
I saw it all coming.
Yeah, and so Last Transaction was very much a reaction to Watergate. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that book? Because, and we had a great exchange over email for a book that I didn't give the most favorable review to, but I loved
A
that we
long
could
way
have this
from my
great
best.
conversation.
It's a little, but it seemed timely. But I'll tell you one anecdote which really sums the whole thing. It was in galleys. Chilton, Roger Elwood somehow was able to persuade Chilton Books, which had published Dune and no other science fiction, but had a science fiction writer, Sub Rosa on staffs, and was responsible for Chilton doing Dune, which had been rejected everywhere. And I forget his name now. A uh, well regarded and a decent guy. But in any event, he plugged for Dune and he got it. And then Dune, to everybody's shock, was a runaway, although it took many years. But the editor was able through it because of Elwood sent it. The editor was able because of that to push through the last transaction and in a new science fiction program. And then the publisher, whose name I never got, wandered into an office someday where the galleys were and he picked up the galleys of their second science fiction novel, and read it. And he spoke to his editor, who spoke to get this out of here. All this filthy language. And do you think presidents talk that way? Can you imagine a president of the United States acting like this? Get it out. Let him keep his goddamn advance. Just get this thing out of our office, which they did. The next week, the Watergate tapes went public.
Jeez.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
all. That's my anecdote.
Interesting.
Elwood saved my ass in a sense. He got it had been rejected somewhere else, and he talked children into taking it and letting me keep the advance.
Now,
So I made $7,000 for a novel which was well on the way to never being published.
well, it got out there, and in 2020, I reviewed it, so we've gone full circle.
And you took us, David, there from what? From Nixon to Trump through the sieve of Reagan.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think that book, as much as for everything that I didn't like about it, what I did think appreciate was how much it said about the presidency and was able to comment on 3 different presidents.
Everybody who reviewed it, and there weren't many, hated the sex. What is that? It's so undignified and filthy and what is a senile, failed president writing his memoirs going to have in the remains of his mind? For God's sakes!
At this point,
it's not as if I'm endorsing it.
Barry, if anybody's reading your work, they got to know this is coming. So I'm not. I don't know.
Right. I know.
Yeah,
I've given you a very frank interview here. Be gentle. Be kind. It's from some forgotten novel. I remember the mistress saying after the affair, "Please remember this and be gentle."
Yes. Well, let's talk about a classic, another one, which is that Professor Wilson is republished, and that's Revelations. And I'm I would like to. I'm going to ask Professor Wilson at this point for a second. What was it that appealed to you about this book that you wanted to reissue it? I personally think this is one of Barry's best works, but tell us.
I think Barry thinks that too, and if I'm not mistaken,
I think it's my best novel.
Okay. Yeah, I think I emailed you and I said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And you said Revelations.
Yeah,
I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
Do you recall? I don't offhand. No.
That's the story you told me was.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I mean, especially
and as I wrote in the afterword for you, Harlan, I didn't have many readers, but I know one of them. Yeah, I know of one of them. Patty Chayefsky got hold of that novel. They stole network from it. Yeah. I'm going to go into my grave with that sad obsession. That was the cameras and the chaos and the profit run from madness and all of it. That's all, and the use of television as a great deformulation, as it were. It's all there. It was anticipated. I wrote that novel. Well, certainly,
I'm very much intrigued in terms of the scholarly work that I do in the pathology of media culture, and that certainly is a touchstone for me. Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Revelations is very much I think the comparison to Network is good. I think Revelations does really amazing things with commenting on how television would unfold years after the book was released. And it's one of the reasons why we read out-of-date science fiction, right? Those of us who go back and read 20th century science fiction.
I am convinced that Chayefsky read it. And I'm not some lone nut in the jungle mumbling this. There are 5 or 6 lone nuts, scattered over the country who put that in print before I did.
you can add me to the lone nuts for this, because I agree. And the thing about Revelations is that it takes, where you were at in the early 70s looking at television, and can tell us so much better about what you were thinking about the medium before, the actual events can color, how you were looking forward to it. And
I was not in my 70s. I was in my 30s.
no, I meant in the 70s.
Oh, in the 70s. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think Revelations is a great work of prophetic science fiction. I think it says so much about the time. So I really want to put that out there to folks, if they have not read that one, to definitely get that. Do you have any other comments?
I have a question. Just so actually it's a two-part question. So was it last week, maybe the week before, I was in a David Gill's Philip K. Dick class and we were talking about modernism and postmodernism and the new wave and stuff. And your name came up, of course. And with Revelations, a figure I was talking about is Marshall McLuhan. Was that on your was he on your register when you? Yeah.
Oh,
right.
yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's what I figured. And then speaking of the new wave, what was your this is a broad question, but we were talking about new worlds in the UK, and then the dangerous visions in America and all that. What was your experience with that as a movement,
I admired Ballard, as I've said, and I do not deny his influence, but I had nothing to do with the new wave otherwise. I wrote what I wanted to write.
Right.
What I knew from the old wave is you could get away with, as I said to Gardner, you could get away with this. At least they were.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, I want to tell you.
I think I taught them more than they taught me. And it's not, it's
I bet
not so much on either end.
I want to tell you about an experiment I did on Facebook last week, and this will be our segue to Destruction of the Temple, because I was working on it may have been Sunday night, so it was less than a week ago. I was working on my review of Destruction of the Temple, and I had a whole scene that I quoted from about where the character is driving on the night roads of America and has this, and it was very J.G. Ballard to me. When I read this paragraph, I was like, this is very, it sounds like Ballard. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to post this quote from Destruction of the Temple on Facebook. I'm going to play a game, and I'm not going to tell people who wrote this. And I'm going to say, guess what science fiction writer wrote these two paragraphs? And within 30 seconds, someone said Ballard. And I said, nope. And then within a couple minutes, we had 43 answers, and they included Harlan Ellison, Kurt Vonnegut, Philip. When then I said, well, this person also, I gave a hint. I said, this person also wrote erotica, and somebody immediately went, Philip Jose Farmer. And it was funny. One of my friends eventually figured it out from that hint and said, oh, it's definitely Malzberg. But it took 43 attempts.
Do me a favor, please. When this is done, make a note and write me what passage.
Well, I can find it for you here in just a second. But while we're talking, and I'll read it to you. But the thing about it is that my point was to tell people, like, this guy is criminally underread. And all you people thought it was Kurt Vonnegut, Harlan Ellison, J.G. Ballard. Several people, one person, even after I said it was not J.G. Ballard, one person said, no, that's definitely Ballard. And I said,
it's a compliment.
I posted this. I know who it was. And it was hilarious to see these reactions. And then afterwards, when I posted my review to Destruction of the Temple, I said, okay, everybody, you all thought it was all these people, but it was Barry Malzberg. And now I want you people to start reading this guy, because this experiment went exactly how I thought it would go.
And where did you post this, Dave?
On Facebook. I did this on Facebook, and it was a lot of readers or serious science fiction people who were hazarding these guesses. Like, I can remember who said who. David James Keaton was convinced that it was Ballard, the author David James Keaton, and I remember it was Ross Lockhart who thought it was Philip Jose Farmer, the editor, publisher, Ross Lockhart. I remember like all these responses. It was hilarious. And it was my buddy Mark Rothenberg who was convinced that it was funny because when he said first he said Ellison, and then when I said no, he said, "All right, L. Ron Hubbard," and he was like, "Just kidding."
That's a compliment. Yeah.
Yes, let me find the quote. In the abscess of dreaming space of America, taking the night roads out of the city, opening up the car to 85 on the straightaways, dodging curves at a cutback to 55, other cars approaching and disappearing like half hunks of image skewered in dreams, nothing else. If we and the other cars meet, explosion, impact, terrific wrenching, and then nothing else. Ever but the cars seem to have no more existence than speed, which I push out of the vehicle, lunging it finally into a straight careening dive from the rise on which we momentarily looked at America. Look at America, and now fall to merge with it. Wonder Waffles and Sam's Super Bar, Dick's Drive-In and Killer Cars, hitting out their great spokes of light toward the land, spokes of that great wheel called the land, knifing out the plains and darkness in their colors. The wheel like a knife in the hands. The old car failing in thrusts of power on those turns, but giving it all it has left. 3 cylinders, 45 horsepowers on the open roads. That was the quote.
That's pure crash, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can see. I mean, it's a very legitimate mistake. You're 43 wrong at. That's pure crash, all of it. I mean, the disaster and the breadth of it. How interesting.
Yeah. So
and I think this was done before Crash. Crash was published in the late 70s, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so Destruction of the Temple. This is a really fascinating book that kind of takes this surreal look at this era of assassination, right? So you had this era where all these leaders were being assassinated, and this is a very surreal science fictional look at like what it meant for our public leaders to just being gunned down in the public eye.
Right.
Is that what Destruction of the Temple was about?
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the way I described it in my review is Destruction of the Temple is a surreal rage directed at the fragile nature of a country that did survive and in wave after wave fell victim to cultural violence.
Thus far, I hope.
Yeah.
Add those 2 words after that sentence.
Yeah. So you use this fake play about the Kennedy assassination, but then the person playing Kennedy is the director, and
purge national guilt.
Yes, and so this is all happening in a post-apocalyptic America. So the post-apocalyptic America is kind of you're throwing a rocket ship into this, right?
Right.
And I wonder how much of the. I mean, do you feel like the science fiction community understood what you were doing, or
Enough of them? Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Silverberg knew from the start what I was. There were a fair amount of. There were people who understood who didn't like it or hated it, but I don't think I ever complained too much about being misunderstood. It was impossible if you read this, you knew where the author was. You could hate it.
Yeah, so it's
like the committee.
So what's interesting is that this is very specifically about this era just a couple of years before you wrote this.
Oh yeah, sure. More than a couple of years. That I wrote that novel in 72, I believe, 73.
Yeah. And so, but here's novel, unfortunately, becoming somewhat relevant again. We don't have assassinations going on, but we have this fragile
Oh, sure.
democracy now.
That's what my afterwards to the Lone Wolf are all about. I was writing in the midst of this.
Yeah.
And I echo Phil Dick in our one telephone conversation at midnight. And he said to me, this was in 74, do you know what it's like to be me, to have written all of this crazy stuff? And it's happening. It's all happening right now as I speak. Oh, it's my novels, and I can't stand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
can't.
actually, Barry, I think of you often in your work with what's going on in the contemporary world right now. I
Yeah.
mean, almost every week, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey,
Yeah.
I have one question, just this is peripheral. So you've mentioned Silverberg a couple of times, and I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but he seems to be very highly regarded by the 20th century science fiction writers in particular. Was that your experience?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What is it about him?
So he's a great writer. I've said now he's the greatest writer alive, and I have felt that in this language, in this language.
Ellison said that too.
He is our greatest writer. As I've said, there are two writers I have been chasing for decades, Mailer and Silverberg. And as I have added to that, I'll never catch either, but boy, pursuing them has done me a lot of good. He's a magnificent writer. There's nothing more. I'll never say a word against him. I was saying something similar about Kathleen Koja way back in the 90s. We collaborated on 25 stories, and I said she's the best writer breathing. I said that in 92, and that might have been so. Her career, unfortunately, it didn't work. What a great writer she was.
Oh, the cipher is amazing.
She had a blazing 5 to 8 years. Silverberg has been like this until he quit quite publicly, but he was like this for 50 years. And
Is
he's incandescent, the son of a bitch. I've chased him. He's better. I'll say it anywhere. But thank God for him. Without him, I wouldn't be as good as I am.
Incidentally, I've been chasing you for many years. But if you had to recommend a book by Silverberg, what would it be?
Try his short stories. I mean,
Yeah.
the late short stories. In another country, just out of pulling at a random title, in another country, which is part of a double and an ace double or whatever, which is a reworking and extension of Vintage Season. But there's a story called what the heck is it? I told you I'm dropping titles and names like flies, but it is a story, an absolutely revolutionary short story which changes everything. It'll come to me the 30 seconds after our conversation ends, but he's just his short stories, the Nebula winners, are incontestably great, all of them.
I think last time we talked, you said some really interesting things about Alfred Bester too, and we have
as another one. Yes, Bester haunts me.
Yeah, so
Bester was our he's uneven and finished too early, and an absolute obscenity defeated in his personal life. And the novels are all rated, but oh man, those short stories in the 50s. Oh my, oh my, oh my. Nothing like him. He was great.
Yeah,
Then
and back to your work. I'm done on Destruction of the Temple, but the most
Sundance, the Silverberg story, Sundance. It's in
Sundance.
Nebula Awards showcase number 4. You should find it everywhere.
This will be
I'll grab a collection of his stories.
Yeah.
I'm sure
this will be a rare case where I have yet to write my review of Day of the Burning, but so I have a rare case to talk to the author before I work on the review. But this is a really fascinating novel of yours. It's very interesting because
it all sits on the last line. It's a stunt. The last line is definitive. He's crazy. He's out of his head. This is not science fiction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well,
but
one funny
I
thing
make
I
that
have to
as clear as I can in the last line of the novel.
one thing I have to admit to is I ended up with 2 copies of this. So I sent my copy to Professor Wilson, my second copy, and I jokingly signed it as you. And I said something like, here you go, you fucking idiot, or something like that. I signed it Barry Malzberg, but so or something like that. So I actually signed this book as you one time, so I have to admit to that as a joke. The Day of the Burning is about a social worker.
Yes.
Right? Did you? Am I correct? Did you do that job for a little while, or
The
did? Or,
New York City Department of Welfare.
yeah, because it really reads like you know what the fuck you're talking about.
I know what the fuck I'm talking about. Yes,
Yeah,
I've among other things, I've done the great welfare novels. I've done Screen. Screen is in Olympia Press, 68. It's absolutely out of my experience there.
yeah.
And how I take their measure, a short story, which is in, I think, my first collection or second. I relied upon that a lot. And my whole, all of the alien bureaucrats in my novels are straight out of the welfare department.
Yeah, so the Day of the Burning really has this feeling of there's this guy who his job is to determine whether people like get public
Are
assistance.
eligible.
Yeah. And then he's visited by an alien who's with some kind of galactic overlords, and then he's trying to determine whether the human race is worthy of
Right,
of of,
right.
ex, of existing.
Which is
And
the same ploy I used in the fan novels, of course,
right.
less riotously.
And but one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I want to get your opinion on this, is because there's this whole like Mars and Venus space shot program things that
Mhm.
seem completely out of left field, and it almost makes this universe more surreal because like the likelihood that we were going to have a Venus or Mars mission in the next couple
I
of
was
years.
taking my advice to Gardner. I was throwing in a rocket ship.
There you
Got
go.
away with it, didn't I? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. And I was thrown in a rocket ship. Yeah, because what it did for me was make the novel feel more surreal. But, and I mentioned this before we started recording, there's a whole chapter where you're reading about, you have a news report from, quote, the all news station. And this is long before CNN and
long before.
all
I gotta look that up, and just remind me. Send me an email after. Just give me a page number.
yeah. This chapter was my favorite part of this book. And you basically like gave a whole shot of what the whole world looks like in this sci-fi future, and it was really interesting because the galactic overlords are trying to decide whether the human race is worthy or not, and getting this picture of all the different things that was going on, it was a really brilliant writing technique for the novel. And what I liked about this novel was that it was very funny, and I don't think many people at the time probably necessarily would have. I don't know if people would have looked at this book as funny. Did you mean for this book to be funny? Because I was laughing a lot during this book. I thought it was hilarious.
The answer is yes. I knew
Okay.
what it is.
Okay.
Most of the time, not always. Not in the Lone Wolf, as I've said. Not in the Lone Wolf, which I thought stunk, and
Yeah.
in the most humiliating way came to understand, in the most humiliatingly apologetic way came to understand was not junk. But anyway, we've been at it in an hour and a half. This has been fascinating, but I think I've drained the barrel of
I
wit.
was just about to say
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Let's wrap up.
Sure.
And
I don't want to wrap up in one way, but in another for all of us, I should. We should.
yeah,
Thank you so much, Barry. It was so good to talk to you.
It's
yeah, it
it,
And
was.
I'll send you those books we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
would you please and stay
Yeah,
in
of course.
touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Stay in.
yeah, and I really appreciate your coming on and talking about this. I think people are, we told people that we were, when we told people we were interviewing you today, many people were very excited. I have one last question, then we'll let you go. But I do the book Book Pilled, which is like a very very loved, very famous YouTube channel where the guy reviews science fiction books. He's been walking around Thailand reading your books recently. He has said that you are becoming his favorite author, and he's much younger than us. How does it
That's
feel?
hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah. How does it feel to reach this young generation, this new generation of writers? It's got to be a great feeling, right?
What I say, and I've written this, there is every reason to be bitter. And of course, I'm bitter, and almost all of us are. You find a writer, but I can say this, I got all the work done that I was put here to do. And I did it to the best of my ability. And I couldn't have done it better. I'm not saying anything. I couldn't have done it better. Just as Fred Pohl would say, nobody could have written that story better than I wrote it. I really did the best I could, and I wrote what I was put here to write. That's all. And there's that, and that's no small thing.
No,
No, it's
I'm
great.
glad you did too.
You
It's
can't
great.
cash it anywhere, but it's
Yeah.
something. And I'm satisfied with the work. I can, as Mailer said about Naked of the Dead, he said I can pull that off the shelf and read a random paragraph now and then and thinking, yeah, that's just about the way it is.
Well, we are excited that people are finding you. We're excited to help in that mission. And in that regard, the one last thing I will remind people is, track down your copy of The Gamesman. We're going to be doing the Null A, Solar Lottery, and Gamesman. It should be the next episode in the feed. These should be coming out together. So we definitely want people to continue to read Malzberg. We're going to do more coverage in the future. So please continue to especially buy the Anti-Oedipus Press reissues
of Galaxies, Beyond Apollo, The Falling Astronauts, and Revelations. Now let Barry go, man. Jesus.
Yes, we're going to let Barry go. And folks, thanks for joining us. And thank you, Barry, again for coming out.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
You very much.